Hello everyone. Thank you for joining me today. For our today's topic, we would like to discuss about past, present, and future. From those tenses, we would like to identify the time contrast or the difference between them. So please pay attention on my explanation in this video. To describe time contrast in our lives that change during years, we can use different times expressions. The first is past tense. Time expressions that we can use are in the past, a few years ago, 10 years ago, in the 2002, and etc. The second, in present, the time expressions that we can use are nowadays, in these days, now, today, and etc. The last is future. The times expressions that we can use are in the future, in then more years, soon, in 5 more years. There are many examples of times expressions that you can use and you can search on the internet. When you find a new one, don't forget to understand the times expression first and categorize which tenses the time expressions is belong. There are two forms of sentences in English. The first is verbal sentence form, and the second is non-verbal sentence. The verbal is a form of sentence where the predicate is a verb. For example, here, I made a cake. I is the subject, made is the predicate, and the function here as a verb, and the object is a cake. So this is what we call a verbal sentence. While the non-verbal sentence is a form of sentence where the predicate is not a finite verb, but an auxiliary verb. In this case, we use was or were. For example, here, I was a high school student. I is the subject, was is the predicate, but we use auxiliary verb here. A high school student is an example of noun. So you can see the difference between verbal and non-verbal. The verbal one, after subject, is followed by verb, while the non-verbal one, after subject, is followed by auxiliary verb. Now, take a look to the form of past tense or the non-verbal sentence. To form the sentence, we need to follow this pattern. There are two types of form that we are going to understand. The first is positive. So we have to start with subject, followed by was or were, and then followed by noun or adjective. And the negative form, we can start with subject followed by was or were, then follow with not, then noun or adjective. Please remember, when we use I, he, she, and it, the auxiliary verb that we use is was. And when we use the subject we, you, they, the auxiliary verb that we use is were. The example of noun can be described as people, places, or thing. For example, teacher is example of people, Purwokerto and hospital are an example of places. We can see the example of sentence here at the below. In the past, this is the time expression, comma, he was a teacher. The second example, in 2013, this is an example of time expression in the past, comma, we were in Purwokerto. Next is an example of adjective. We have beautiful, big, skinny, chubby, and handsome. On the below, we can see the example of sentence started with time expression in the past. A few years ago, I was skinny. Next one, 3 years ago, you were chubby. Now let's move on to the next topic about past tense or verbal sentence. Here we are going to understand the verbal sentence with two forms. The first is positive, the next is negative. The positive form, we can start with subject followed by verb to followed by object. And in negative, we can start with subject followed by didn't or did not and followed by verb 1. Take a look to the difference of positive and negative. In positive, we use verb 2. In negative, we use verb 1. While the subject of I, you, he, she, it, we, you, and they follow directly with verb. Don't forget, there are two types of verb, such as regular and irregular verb. Please take a look to your semester 1 materials. What are the example of regular verbs and what are the example of irregular verbs? Now, take a look to the example of the sentence. In the past, I walked to my school. In 2013, I arrived in Purwokerto. Here, walk and arrive are an example of regular verbs. The next example, last year, I bought my first motorcycle. 10 years ago, I went to Singapore. Here, both and when are an example of irregular verbs. The next tense is simple present. Simple present used when an action is happening right now or regularly. We have two forms here. When we use the subject she, he, it, we need to add s or es on the verb. Example, does, has, draws, studies, teaches, and etc. But when we want to make sentence started with the subject I, you, we, they, we do not need to add s on the verb. For example here, do, have, draw, study, and teach. You also have to note two important things. The first one, when the verbs ending in sh, ch, s, s, o, x, z, we need to add es. Example, wash become washes, watch become watches, go become goes, and relax become relaxes. The second note, when you find the verbs ending in consonant, here for example is y, we change the y become an I. Then you can add es. For example, carry become carries, study, studies, cry become cries, and fly become flies. Except the word of play, we don't need es, we only add s here. Besides simple present, we can also using present continuous in telling the time contrast. For example here, in these days, I am living in Purwokerto. Or, today, I am working as an English lecturer. The last tenses is future tense, or in this case we choose be going to prediction of future tense. It is used to predict future events that are very near and can be seen or seem sure to happen. To make the sentence, we have to follow this pattern. The subject I, the be verb is am. Subject Sandy, the be verb is, and the subject they, be verb is are. They are followed by going to and followed by base form verb. Here, verb 1 or base form is study, visit, and travel. The example of sentence, don't forget to add the time expression here. In the future, I am going to wear fancy clothes. Or we can use future tense with will and might. We use will to express certainty about the future, and we use might to express possibility. That means you are not certain about something. When you want to make the sentence in future tense, you have to follow this pattern. The subject I, the be verb is am. The subject Sandy, he or she, the be verb is. And the subject they, you, we, the be verb is are, and all of those subjects can be followed by will or might. Don't forget after that followed by base form verb or verb 1. The example of sentence here: in 10 more years I will live in Europe. In 10 more years, an example of time expression in the future. I is the subject, will is the modal, and followed by verb 1 here is live. Next, soon I might buy a car. Soon is an example of time expression in the future. I is the subject and the modal here is might. After that, followed by verb 1, buy. The last example is in 5 more years I will work at the Harvard University. Future expression in 5 more years. Subject I with modal will and the verb is work. Now let's move on. After you have learned those 3 sentences, past, present, and future, you have to combine those sentences into one passage that show a time contrast. Here, the theme is about transportation. The first sentence is using past tense. The sentence is: in the past, people use train for traveling. Nowadays, example of simple present tense. Nowadays, people drive their own car. And the last sentence: in the future, people might have self-driving cars. From this passage, each paragraph show a time contrast from 3 tenses that we have discussed. The first is simple past, the second is simple present, and the third one is future tense. The next example of passage that telling time contrast is the theme of communication. The first sentence is: before the internet, people use letters for sending message. Nowadays, we are texting our friends to communicate. Sometimes, the future, people will implant their phone. On the first sentence, an example of simple past of verbal sentence. The next sentence is an example of present continuous sentence, and the last sentence is an example of future tense using will. And here are another example of time contrast using theme housing. This is a simple example because the passage only use 2 tenses. The first sentence: in the past, people live in a bigger house. Today, people live in a minimalist house. Here in the passage, the first sentence is simple past and the second sentence is simple present. Now, it's your turn. To have a better understanding about the time contrast, You have to do this exercise. Practice making a time contrast sentence with the theme such as environment, fashion, entertainment, and technology. You can choose only one topic for one student. Each student has to make at least minimal 2 sentences of time contrast with the time expression that consists of simple past and present tense, and maximum of 3 sentences that consists of simple past, present tense, and future tense. You have to do this exercise in the forum that is provided in meeting 25. Remember, internet is a good source to do this exercise, but plagiarism from the internet is a crime, and the lecturer will know your sentences whether it is copy-paste or not. Thank you for your attention in this topic. Last but not least, success is no accident. It is a hard work. So as a student, you have to do a hard work in every materials that you have learned. Thank you and see you next time.